This is Professor L.B.Gayakawad's English Literature Web. I am Professor L.B. Gayakawad is discussing today on the topic lecture number 353. The title is History of Lyric. In this lecture we will discuss on 17th century lyric, metaphysical lyric and religious poetry, as well as we will see Cavalier, that is Caroline poetry, and this is the part 3rd. Before going to the topic, I will request you all to watch, like, share, subscribe my channel. Then I will request you to see all the notes which I have put in the description box. Here we are going now to the topic. The topic is 17th century lyric. This lyric is known as experimental, as the lyricists have gone through various experiments in writing their lyrics on various themes and thoughts. Remember, 17th century lyric, when we study, this lyric is known as the experimental lyric. Means these poets have made the experiments in writing their lyrics and they have written on various themes and thoughts. That's why this lyric was experimental, means they had written their poems through various experiments. These lyrics have been classified as follows. The first is metaphysical lyric. When we think of the metaphysical lyric, then we will see, or we can see, or we do see, John Donne and his followers conceived these lyrics poems, means lyrical poems, I will say. Means when we discuss of the metaphysical poetry, then we see that there was only one poet who was very much a major poet, and that was John Donne, and there were his followers, and he himself conceived the lyrical poems in those days. Dryden studied John Donne's poetry and named it as metaphysical poetry. Remember, the critic, I will say, the poet, I will say, Dryden, he studied the poems of John Donne and he saw all the features of his poetry and he coined it, means he coined this poetry, or he named this poetry as the metaphysical poetry. The metaphysical poetry is more elaborating, that is more detailed than ordinary lyric. Remember, here the explanation is that there is the ordinary lyric, means some poets have written the ordinary lyric, but this metaphysical lyric is very much different from this ordinary lyric, because this lyric is very much philosophical, very much intellectual, and therefore it is not easy to understand, because the poets have used the conceit as the means of the poetry. Remember, they have used the means of the conceit, means they have used this conceit, and because of this conceit the metaphysical poetry has become very much difficult to understand. The metaphysical poets have focused on the themes like unstable world and lost faith in orthodox thoughts and beliefs that the structure of the society was disturbed. Remember, when we think of the poets of the metaphysical school, then we see that all these poets have focused their poems on the themes like unstable world, because the world in those days was unstable, means nothing was stable of the people and people were struggling with each other, and that's why it is called the unstable world. And people had lost their faith and they were not giving importance to the religion also, means they were becoming so modern, they were living their moral values, and that's why because of this social structure, or because of this structure of the society, these poets had become very much unhappy, and that's why these poets have written such poems, and they have advised such a social society, and therefore the responsibility of the metaphysical poets, I will say, comes that they should guide or they should advise such society, because the society should not be broken, or the society should not be disturbed, or that society should be very much nice, and that's why they have written such poems to guide such people. They have gone through the themes like witty comparisons. Remember, these poets have written their poems on the theme of witty comparisons, means their comparisons are there which are full of very wit. Wit means, I will say, it is full of very much intelligence, and their poems are very much intelligent poems. Then there is the juxtaposition, means there is the juxtaposition, that means closeness is there, means they have written the closeness of some matters, or they have been very much close to the particular matter, and they have used the imagery known as conceit. Remember, these poets have written the conceit, that is called the imagery, because these poets have used all the images in their poems, that is called the conceit, and because of this conceit their poems have become very much difficult to understand. And again I will say that their poetry has given us the philosophy of life, and that's why their poetry has been very much difficult. And they have given some stress, I will say, or some clue, I will say, in the sense of religion, spirituality, and that's why this poetry has become very much difficult for understanding. Vaughan, Herbert, Crosser, Carew, Traherne and Cowley, these are the main poets then after this John Donne, and these poets have been impressed by John Donne's poetry, we can see. Now the second type of the poetry in those days was the religious poetry. Now we will see the definition or the explanation regarding this religious poetry. Maximum metaphysical poets wrote on different religious topics. Remember, there are many metaphysical poets whom we have seen and we have studied them. All these metaphysical poets have written their poems on the religious matters, on the religious themes, because the religion was their main issue, and they had written their all poems on the matter of religion. John Donne was a major one in writing religious themes. Remember, John Donne was the poet who wrote all his lyrics on the basis of religion. All his poems are based on religion. He has given some examples of religion. He has gone through religion while explaining his poems. John Donne was followed more by Herbert, and hence Herbert is known as the saint of the school of metaphysical poetry, being very close to God, Christ. Remember, only because of the effect, only because of the influence of John Donne, Herbert was impressed, and then Herbert did progress in this way that this gentleman has been called the saint of the metaphysical poetry. And that's why here I will say that this gentleman became very much important in the sense of religion, and he wrote all the poems to give importance of the religion to society. Then Vaughan, Crosser became Herbert's followers and structured on religion. Now the next topic which we are going now to discuss is Cavalier poetry or Caroline poetry. Remember, King Charles I was ruling, hence this period is called the Caroline period. This Charles I was ruling there since 1625 to 1649, and so this poetry is conceived on king's life. Remember, this poetry which now we are discussing is discussed on the life of the poet. I will say on the life of the poet means in the sense of the king. On the life of the poet means some part of the situation was related with the poet, because the poet has seen, the poet has experienced all this situation in the life of that king with the eyes of the poet, and that's why this poetry has been written on the life of the poet also, and on the life of the king also, and that's why it is said that this poetry is conceived on king's life and court life. I will say court life means the court means there was the court of the king, and many poems have been written on the life of the court. And this poetry or the matter of the poetry was really against the Puritan people who were there. Means here the this poetry, I will say, was against the I will say against the rules and regulations of the people who were purely Puritan. Means they were making the, I will say, making the exaggeration of religion, and that's why such Puritans were very much disturbed by reading or by watching, or I will say by listening to such a poem or such poetry. These courtier lyricists are known as Cavalier or Caroline poets, namely Herrick, Carew, Suckling, Lovelace, and minors are Falkland, Mean, Keyvalent, Habington, Maine, Randolph, and many more. So all these poets have written these poems, means I will say the poems which are famous in the name of Cavalier or in the name of Caroline. These poets wrote short poems, means these poets have written their short poems, they have written their nature poems, and they have written their simplicity, means they have brought the simplicity against pompous court life, because we have seen that the court life of the king was very much problematic, very much pompous. The life was very much I will say false, it was very much sophisticated, and that's why these poets did not like that life, and so they wrote their poems, very much simple poems against pompous court life without spontaneity, means there was no spontaneity, because that life was very much pompous, and that's why this court life was not easy life. It was not the life which was romantic, or it was not the life which will give the importance to the character of the person. Such type of spontaneity was not there, like the Elizabethan I will say poets, or like the Elizabethan period and aristocratic speech, means this was the problematic situation of this era. So here today we have finished this lecture. Again we will be there in front of each other with a new lecture. Thank you very much.